some of the problems with drug company influence on clinical trials is international, not unique to the United States. But the components that are unique to the United States are really important. First, we have no health technology assessment, no formal health technology assessment. So doctors are not informed about which one of the four new drugs. The FDA approves 30 drugs, approximately 30 drugs every year that are truly new molecular entities. And it turns out that only one out of four of those have been shown to be superior to previously existing therapy. But because we are unique in not having health technology assessment, independent health technology assessment, the doctors can't know in real time which one of the four new drugs is more effective than older therapy and worth the extra money. We do not allow federally funded cost effectiveness studies. Costs cannot be considered in federally funded clinical guidelines. We have no price regulation, which means that there's a far higher payoff in the United States for marketing than there is in the other countries. And we have this amazing onslaught of direct-to-consumer advertising that only New Zealand has, and New Zealand has such a well-functioning pharmaceutical program that it spends the least amount per person on drugs compared to other wealthy nations, and we spend by far the most. So the consequences of the difference in our drug policy is that the docs, as I just said, can't identify which one out of four new drugs is truly effective, but it means that less effective new drugs are used more quickly in the United States. It means that the lack of price regulation means that brand name drugs cost 3.5 times more in the United States than in other OECD countries. And the result of all this is that between 2/3 and 3/4 of global pharmaceutical profits come from the United States. Now I'm going to speed up a little bit. I spent a lot of time on the principles of what's going on and understanding that the problem in the cost and the efficacy of our healthcare is fundamentally a knowledge problem. I'm going to present two different examples, diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Now, these are, I cover these, each one has a chapter in my book, and I'm going to go quickly now so that we have time to answer questions. So as I race through, jot down your questions and read the book. It's all explained in the book. So in 2002, there was a study published in the New England Journal that was the real deal. The study was designed to determine how best to prevent people who were at high risk of getting diabetes from getting diabetes, from going from high risk to actually having the disease. And the study was designed, and I should add that this was a publicly funded study. So the job wasn't to figure out which drugs to make the most money on. It was to figure out how best to prevent people from getting diabetes. So the study randomized a group of high-risk patients, high-risk people who did not have diabetes, to three groups. One group was the control group, got usual care. One group got metformin, which is an inexpensive first-line drug to treat diabetes. And one group got intensive lifestyle counseling, 16 individual sessions and then monthly sessions thereafter. And the study was genuinely designed to figure out what's the best way to prevent people at high risk from getting diabetes. So here are the results. This is change in weight, and this is years of the study. And we see that people in the lifestyle arm lost about a little over 4 kilograms of weight, that's 10 pounds of weight, and kept it off. The other folks, the people who took metformin lost a little weight. The people in the placebo group lost practically nothing. So when doctors say that it's a waste of time to talk to their patients, to engage their patients in discussions about lifestyle modification because they won't do it, this is absolutely rock solid, randomized, controlled trial that shows that people will change when they're given the proper information and they're given the proper coaching to make those changes. And in physical activity, we see that the people in the lifestyle arm got to about 7.5 net hours per week. That's like an hour and a half walking at 4 miles per hour. Significant amount of exercise. The others were just about the same, increased their exercise just a little bit. But this shows how effective lifestyle modification is. And the results showed that this is the percentage of people that went on to get diabetes during the study. You can see that the people in the placebo group went on to get the highest percentage, and the people in the metformin group developed 31% less diabetes than in the placebo group, and the people in the lifestyle group developed 58%. They were 58% less likely to develop diabetes. So the lifestyle modification works. Now let's take a look at the context of diabetes. So this is the percentage of people with diabetes in 2004 in the United States, and the light blue color is 3.3 to 6.5%, and you can see it goes up. So that's 2004, and then we add in 2012, and you can see how much more diabetes we have, and then you add in 2019, and you can see how much more diabetes yet we still have. And why all the diabetes? Well, the biggest reason is that obesity is going up. 1999 to 2000, it was 30% were obese in the United States, and it went up some about 40% by 2017-18. And we know that obesity is directly related to diabetes. This is an interesting study that separated out genetic risk and then looked within each of 3 levels of genetic risk how much role obesity played in increasing the risk. And you can see obesity here, low genetic risk, intermediate genetic risk, and high genetic risk. And in fact, obesity increases the risk of diabetes by 8-fold. Let me skip that one. And we see that in 2000, from 2000 to now, the percentage of Americans with diabetes has doubled. This only goes up 2015, but if we take it to the present, the percentage of Americans with diabetes has doubled. So we know how to cut the rate of developing diabetes by more than half, and yet we see the percentage doubling. And we see that Americans have about 50% higher rate of diabetes than the average OECD country. We see, if we look at innovations in insulin therapy, in 1923, insulin from cows and pigs was patented. In 1982, we had the first recombinant insulin, recombinant DNA recombinant human insulin, and then we got insulin analogs in 96. This is an ad, a heart-tugging ad for the first generation of bioengineered insulin, which came out in 1982. And it said he's 4 years old and he's already living in his past. And the argument is in the ad, in the blue box, it says Humulin is outstandingly pure. This is the first bioengineered insulin, and it's less immunogenic form of insulin than that which comes from the pancreas of pigs and cattle. Hence, it produces fewer antibodies. Well, is that true? Well, no, it's not true. The Cochrane Review said about comparing animal insulins to the recombinant human insulin, the Cochrane Review said a comparison of the effects of human and animal insulin, as well as the adverse reaction profile, did not show any clinically relevant differences. The story of the introduction of human insulin might be repeated by contemporary launching campaigns to introduce pharmaceutical and technological innovations that are not backed up by sufficient proof of their advantages. It's an opportunity to charge more money without proven scientific benefit. And then we saw the insulin analogs come along. These are the drugs that are so expensive now that are in the news that cost between $200 and $300 per vial. And we find that the Cochrane Review comparing the insulin analogs to the first generation of bioengineered insulin. And the Cochrane Review says our analysis showed that short-acting insulin analogs were almost identically effective to regular human insulin in long-term glycemic control. And until long-term safety data are available, we suggest a cautious response. Well, there was not a cautious response. Here's a study that shows the use of human insulin, human recombinant human insulin, insulin analogs, and animal insulin. Animal insulin by 2000 had gone to zero. We don't even sell it. You can't buy it in the United States. It's not made. It's not sold. It's been chased away out of the market. In 2000, when the insulin analogs were just coming along, there was a low percentage of use, but that use went up to 90%. Now, the key here, to skip over some of the slides and move along, the key here is that all type 1 diabetics need insulin, and a quarter of type 2 diabetics need insulin. But there are so many more type 2 diabetics than type 1 diabetics that 80% of the insulin that's used in the United States is used by type 2 diabetics. There is no evidence that insulin analogs provide an advantage to type 2 diabetics. So the use of insulin analogs here in 2000, that goes up to 90% by 2010, 2012. For type 2 diabetics, 80% of the people using insulin, is driven by marketing. It's not driven by science. The marketers controlled this. They hired a PR firm. They convinced the medical world that hemoglobin A1C levels should be below 7. There was no scientific evidence to support that. And then they argued that their insulin analogs would be safer to get people down to those low levels of hemoglobin A1C. Well, it turned out not only was there no evidence, but in 2008, there was a study published in the New England Journal, the Accord study, that showed that it was stopped prematurely because the mortality rate in the people who were having tighter control of their type 2 diabetes had a higher death rate. And yet the standard still stayed to have tight control of hemoglobin A1C and blood sugar levels for people with type 2 diabetes. And the American Diabetes Association and the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, who write the guidelines for diabetes, persisted in saying that type 2 diabetics should be treated with insulin analogs. There was no evidence to support it, no significant evidence to support it, and the prices were rising. They went from $21 a vial for insulin analogs in 1996 up to $300, driven by marketing. The countries that had health technology assessment, England, Germany, Canada, they told their doctors that there's no superiority of insulin analogs and that people with type 2 diabetes should be started on a recombinant human insulin, which costs less than a tenth as much as the insulin analogs. So this whole crisis about insulin prices is generated by this $20 billion a year that we're wasting treating people with type 2 diabetes first line with insulin analogs. If we brought the 90% of those people, type 2 diabetics who are getting treated with insulin analogs, back to recombinant human insulin, we'd save about $20 billion. And that would be almost enough to enter all the Americans at high risk of diabetes in a program like the diabetes prevention program that I started talking about a few slides ago, which cut down the incidence of diabetes by 58%. We could enter all those people in a community-based program, YMCA or community health center-based program, and cut down the incidence of diabetes rather than letting the incidence of diabetes run rampant into an endemic, and let the number of diabetics go up and our costs go up instead of making better health and saving money. That's the problem with our healthcare system. In a nutshell, that's the core problem. We'll skip over these. This is a key concept that I came across. Jill Lepore is a history professor at Harvard, a brilliant woman. I have no idea how she does what she does. She writes for the New Yorker, and she writes these wonderful books. And she wrote a book of U.S. history. And in it, she was talking about the concept of innovation when it was introduced is not a concept of social benefit. It's a concept, it's a business concept. And what Jill Lepore says is innovation might make the world a better place, or it might not. Think of the insulins now that we're talking about. It might not. The point was, innovation was not concerned with goodness. It was concerned with novelty, speed, and profit. And that really, in a nutshell, defines what's wrong with the American healthcare system. If we go to cardiovascular disease, let me see how much time we have. Well, I got to be finishing up, so I'll get there real quickly. The guidelines that came out for statin use in 2013, which made a major change, recommended that half of the adults in the United States, age 40 and over, be treated with a statin therapy. Most of them did not have heart disease. 60% did not have heart disease, 40% did. The evidence shows that statins do not significantly reduce the risk of death in people who don't have heart disease. And you have to treat 100 people for 5 years in order to prevent one non-fatal heart attack or stroke. And the other 99 will not benefit. For people who do have heart disease, you have to treat 30 people, not 100, but 30 people with a statin in order to prevent one heart attack or stroke, and 80 people for 5 years to prevent one mortality. So for secondary prevention, there are significant benefits in death, reduction in death. Can I have 3 more minutes?
Actually, Dr. Abramson, pardon the interruption. We wanted to make sure we would prefer you go as long as you need to go. We're less concerned about the Q&A. We're interested in everything you want to share. So please go right ahead.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So for people who do have cardiovascular disease, you have to treat 30 to prevent a heart attack or stroke, and you have to treat 80 for 5 years to prevent a death. Now, I was the lead author in a paper that was published in the British Medical Journal in 2013. We analyzed the data. We're not getting the primary data because that's locked up and the companies are holding on to it. You can't get it. But we analyzed the data, the best data that we could get. And we concluded in our BMJ article that lifestyle factors, including exercise, lack of exercise, tobacco use, and unhealthy diet account for 80% of cardiovascular disease. And yet you have to treat 100 people who have between 7.5% and 20% risk of developing cardiovascular disease over the next 10 years. You have to treat 100 of those people for 5 years to prevent one event. But 80% reduction with healthy lifestyle. And our article was published, and the leading cholesterol authorities at the Cholesterol Treatment Trialists Collaboration demanded it be retracted. Went to the editor of the BMJ and demanded it be retracted. She appointed an external panel of 6 people who unanimously decided that there was no cause for retraction of our paper. And in the process of the panel doing its work and the editors understanding what was going on, they realized that the people who had done the underlying clinical trial data were not available. And the people who wrote the guidelines did not have access to the actual clinical trial data. So the BMJ editors took it upon themselves to write to 32 lead investigators of major statin trials and request that they submit their data to the BMJ and the BMJ would appoint a panel to independently analyze the data and tell people what the real data show. Of the 32 people who were contacted to share their data, after a year's time, only 7 had responded to the BMJ. The other 25 had not even bothered to respond. So the editors of the BMJ wrote an editorial. They said the statin saga forces us to confront the deep flaws in our current system for evaluating medicines and guiding clinical decisions. In particular, how can it be right to recommend mass treatment of healthy people without independent review of patient-level data, especially the data on adverse effects? The statins trialists have huge influence, and they have a choice. They can take the lead on transparency, meaning share their data, or be pulled kicking and screaming into the light. This is published as an editorial in the BMJ. You'd think it would change the world. It didn't. It did not. The data were never turned over. This was written in 2015. The data were never turned over, and we still don't know what that data show. So half of American adults are recommended to take statins, and 60% of that half is primary prevention without a history of cardiovascular disease. And we just plain don't know what the data show. And this is an absurd situation where healthcare, it just exposes the extent to which healthcare is a financial proposition and not a health generating proposition. So our conclusions: the primary purpose of most new medical knowledge is to support the use of drugs and devices, not necessarily to promote efficiency, efficacy, or well-being. Doctors and other healthcare providers need, but cannot get, accurate, reasonably complete, and epidemiologically balanced data. Industry and government are unlikely to rectify these problems. And what is the real conclusion here? Take responsibility for your own health. This slide shows that 20% of our health is determined by healthcare, and the other 80% are determined by health behaviors, socioeconomic factors, and physical environment. It's hard to do something about your socioeconomic factors, and I could come back and give another 2-hour lecture about the increasing disparities in the distribution of income and wealth in the United States as a health problem. But the bottom line is 20% of our health is healthcare, 80% has to do with social factors, and the situation is very broken, and it's imperative that you take control of the things you can take control of to maintain and improve your health. How do we go forward? Rebalance medical spending and social spending. In the United States, we are way off the charts in terms of the ratio of social spending to health spending. We're reversed. We're standing on our head. And why is that? It's because of this epistemological problem where the knowledge that's created is about new drugs and devices. They cost a lot of money, and they pull a whole lot of money into the healthcare system, and they pull it out of social spending, which the other wealthy countries spend on, and they have much better health, and they spend a lot less on healthcare and a higher quality of life. Rebalance the medical research agenda to reflect epidemiological needs, not the financial goals of the sponsors of the research. Mandate pre-publication data, transparency, and peer review. We cannot go forward with doctors thinking they're practicing evidence-based medicine when the evidence-based medicine is not based on evidence. It's absurd. And we've got to get this message out to doctors. So if you do buy my book and you read it, please loan it to your doctor to read, because your doctor does not understand this. I can guarantee you that. And we must implement health technology assessment and cost effectiveness studies. It's craziness to be spending $1.5 trillion extra and not even know what we're spending it on. Finally, make democracy work. Americans want drug price controls. They understand that the drug companies are interested in profits first and foremost. And in fact, that's what corporations should do. They should maximize the return on investment to their investors. That's what corporations do in the United States. The issue is that we need referees. The market is not fulfilling any social responsibility without guardrails that are provided by government. It just doesn't work. It's market failure. And the companies are doing what they're supposed to do. It would be as if we were playing professional football games with no officials, and we were letting the football players call their own fouls. That's an absurd situation. It would turn into absolute mayhem. It would be a death brawl in the middle of the football field if we tried to do that. And that's what we have going on in our healthcare system.